it's Michelle Teberge, and I got a great question. Had a friend who's looking for her first studio. She said, I'd like to rent a small, inexpensive art studio. I've never done this before. Do you have any recommendations for what qualities to look for? So I thought that was a great question. I just never thought people would have that question, so I didn't think to do a video or a blog post on it before, but it's something I have a lot to say about since I've had a studio for the past 27 years and different types of studios. I'm going to do another post about that, but I'm going to answer this question in this video. So my first question would be, why do you want a studio? Because some people work at home. I mean, when I was a student in the summers, I would work in my bedroom. So what is it that you want it for? Because that's a big part of answering that question. So number one, what types of projects and materials will you be using in the studio? How often will you be using the studio? What are your work habits? Do you prefer to work for long stretches during the day, or do you tend to work in little spurts, like an hour, 2 hours, 30 minutes, and so forth? Do you like to take short breaks and do other activities in between doing your art? So your work habits are really important, because in some cases you're better served by having a studio in your home or closer to your home, because you're not going to be able to use the time effectively for your personal creative process. So some people like to just get away and work for long stretches, and others need sort of to take the breaks, or for whatever reasons, maybe you're taking care of children or other family members. So I have one friend who gardening is really integral, and I used to do that. I used to work in the studio and then go out and work in the garden, and those two things fed each other. So having a studio at home really worked for me very well at the time. I had a question if you'd ever considered sharing a studio with one or more other artists. Like, for instance, I share my studio with 2 other artists. There's another whole half of this that's always off camera, but there's 2 more people over there. And then what time of day, because that's going to affect the lighting. If you work at night, then you're going to have to make sure that the space has adequate lighting for you to work at night. If you work during the day and you need daylight, what kind of daylight does the space offer? So other things to consider are, will you be working on more than one project at a time? So do you need space for more project than one project at a time? I have this table, and then I have the table over there that you may have seen in some of my other videos. I have walls here, walls there, so I have a lot of different spaces. And I've even, when these tables were taken up, done small gouache drawings over at my desk. So I have a lot of surfaces I can work on while things are drying or in process. Will you be storing large artworks? That's a big deal. Some people work in sculpture and they need a considerable amount of space for that. So you've got to sort of figure out how much space you'll need at a minimum, and how much you'll be producing, and that kind of thing. So do you need ventilation in your space? Do you work better alone or with other people around, and so forth? So one thing to consider is sharing a space. So many studios, many cities have studio spaces that are shared. Either it's a large building with a lot of other artists. That's a more typical situation. And then I've seen a lot of spaces where it's an open space and people rent it by the hour. So I feel like I've heard that somewhere called art gym or whatever. I don't, in your locality they may have something similar, or you may even want to start that up for people in your community. So it'd be, one big open space with lockers, easels, a utility sink, and so forth, so that you can just come in when you need it, and you don't have to pay the huge price of renting something 24/7 when you're not needing it that often. So the other thing about that is some artists feel isolated. That's a really easy thing to happen. You can feel very alone in your pursuit, and some people, that's great. They love it. They just feel really, at peace, they're filled up by that, and other people feel a little lost because they're alone all the time and they don't have any, that outside motivation, or also sort of the water cooler conversations that happen at workplaces and things. You don't have any of that. You're sort of all on your own trying to make it work. So when you have other people working with you, you think of it as a profession and not just a hobby. It becomes your workplace, and so you consider it just like any other work environment. It encourages you to create a regular schedule rather than letting things get in the way of your creative time. I know some people just are not able to create if they don't have a studio outside their home. They'll try and they can't really get it together. So if that's been an issue for you, it's something that you might consider, is if you've had a hard time getting work going in your home space, maybe you could try, even just temporarily, if you're not sure about the financial commitment, there are a lot of artists go on residencies and need to sublet their studios for a month, 2 months, something like that. So that's a good way to sort of try out what it's like to have a studio outside your home. Seeing what your studio mates are doing can give you creative inspiration. So even though I haven't often overlapped with a lot of my studio mates over the years, I come in and I see what's on their wall, what have they been doing, and it's like their creative ideas are in the atmosphere, and it helps me, be excited about developing my creative ideas. So there's something really nice about being in community, even if you're not physically in the same space at the same time. And then sometimes that's even better if you're in the same space at the same time. Just depends on you and how you like to work. So it's really good to be very clear, especially when you're sharing spaces. Really spend time thinking about what is optimal for you, and don't settle for less. So if you have someone who, if you need to work alone and you have someone who wants to share the space with you, but they're going to be there the same hours as you will, then that's probably not a good fit, and you have to keep looking for someone else. Another benefit of sharing studio space is you can share materials and equipment. For instance, if you do any kind of woodworking, maybe one person has the table saw, one person has the jigsaw or whatever, and you can share those things in lower costs. Or sometimes you can get into a studio where equipment's already there, like a group of people, glass artists, who have a kiln and so forth, or ceramic artists. It's also less costly. You can split the utilities, your internet expenses, your phone expenses, and so forth. It also offers the possibility of creative dialogue. Maybe you have impromptu critiques, or just get feedback, or they share opportunities with you, shows that are coming up, or shows to apply for, and so forth. You can do open studios together, so you can host open studios as like an open house in your studio, and many localities will have an art organization will organize that and create a map, but there's no reason you can't just open your studio to people, invite people, send out an email, and people love to come in and see an art studio. It's just very exciting for them to see behind the scenes how art gets made and what the creative space is like. Having your own space means you can go anytime you want, day or night. You never have to worry about infringing on other people, or if you have a studio visit, gallery person, a curator, you don't have to worry about that interfering, or just anything, talking and activity that might disturb a neighbor. You don't have to worry about that. You can schedule things whenever you like. You have full control over who enters the space and sees your work. If you're private about your work and your process, that could be very important for you. You can leave it messy and not worry that it's going to affect other people or disturb other people. You can turn up your music loud, or you can listen to the radio, again, not worrying about other people. Have quiet when you like, and take a nap. I have a little nap mat. I always have a nap mat in my studio spaces because that's part of my creative process, taking naps. So those are some things to consider. Another topic that comes up for people is light. There's sort of a historical idea that you need north light, for painting or whatever. I've never had that. I've never found it to be necessary. North light would be less changing throughout the day because you don't have direct sunlight. It would provide a much more steady, even type of light. Certain types of painters, if you're working from a motif, a still life, a model, and you really need consistent lighting over several hours, that could be essential for you. But the kind of work I do, I need good light, I need daylight to see color as truly as possible, but I don't work from a motif, so I don't need a consistent lighting situation like that. You can also control that too, darken a room and use lights and so forth, so that shouldn't be a hindrance. It's very rare that you will get the ideal north light studio. I've never seen anyone with that. I don't think. Not that I can recall. Carpeting, do you want carpeting or not? Are your materials messy? Do you work on the floor ever? You know, are your materials flammable? You probably don't want carpeting if you work in oil, because turpentine is very flammable. The rags are very flammable, and you can they can ignite and combust spontaneously, and that can cause real serious issues. So carpeting or no carpeting. And many of these things can be negotiated with a landlord. If you're in a non-traditional art space, it's nice but not essential to have a slop sink or utility sink. That's a larger sink, not just like a little restroom lavatory. So it's hard to fill up big jugs and buckets of water and wash large brushes in little tiny sinks. But if you just do watercolor and just small things and just need a little bit of water, that's not going to be an issue for you. If you want to have classes in the space, again, you might need more space. You might need accessible space, wheelchair accessible restrooms and things like that, depending again on the laws in your area. If you want to have people in, sometimes it's required that you have accessibility for everyone, so all people can partake in your classes. I've actually never had a sink in my space, so again, don't let that stop you. I use bucket system. I bring buckets from the utility sink that is outdoors and down a little alley between two buildings. And it's fine. I've been doing it a long time. It's not a big issue. Also makes me more conscious of how much water I'm using, more conservative with the water. I think that's a good thing. So I hope this helped you. And I'd love for you to leave any kind of comments. If you like the video, just hit like so I know that you're enjoying and getting something out of this content. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, all of you who've subscribed. It really motivates me to keep going on and keep making more content for you. And feel free to leave questions, comments, share your experiences. If you're considering this step, I'm really excited for you. I definitely encourage it. It's something about, it can be a threshold for you to take your work more seriously, take yourself, your creativity more seriously, and be more committed to it. And I think that could be a very exciting threshold for people. So I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for watching.